Thank you very much. For anybody who has just landed from Mars, one of us is Adam Clayton. And I'm absolutely thrilled on all our behalves to welcome Adam, the 50% of the 50% of you two that we have joining us today. We'll hear from Edge a little later. And rather comfortingly, the two guys have offered or guaranteed that they won't fact check each other, so we're grateful for that. And along with Edge, we are delighted and most grateful to welcome Adam as one of our first investors in Impact Ireland, one of the first members of our Global Advisory Council. Adam, as you know, is a sometime rock star and current star of Gardener's World. Hasn't he done well? Congratulations. And what you may not know also is that between us, Adam and I have 22 Grammys, 2 Golden Globes and an Oscar nomination. Thank you for letting me pronounce that to the world, Adam. But Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you for your support and your deep involvement in the Global Advisory Council. We're most grateful. And for this conversation, and you and I have discussed this. You were born, of course, in Blighty in the UK, and your family came over here at a very, to put it mildly, unpropitious time in the 60s in Ireland, right? So you were going against the trend. What prompted the family to come to Ireland? And what do you remember of that transition, coming over here as a young Brit, growing up Irish?
Well, it's very different from the country it is now turned into, and which we all enjoy and love. My father had kind of come out of the Suez Middle East War, and hopefully we can mention that here. And so it was the late 50s. He was a fighter pilot, and he was looking for work in commercial aviation. And at the time, there was a fledgling company called Aer Lingus, which nobody could pronounce it at the time. But my parents thought this would be a good place to bring up a child, and they didn't know very much about Ireland. They had a vague memory that it might have once been part of the British Empire, but
we haven't forgotten. Carry on.
So they knew they were in a safe place. They actually knew very little about Ireland when they came here, when they emigrated. And unfortunately passed that on to me for quite a part of my early years. And I really only discovered that I was Irish from about the age of 16 on, when I kind of got away from the parental home experience and met the guys in U2 who put me straight very quickly that I was the blow-in, as we are known. But I feel totally culturally Irish now. And indeed, being in one of the most successful Irish bands of all time, you get your eye in very quickly. So part of getting my eye in was realizing the advantages of coming from Ireland and the advantages of doing things in Ireland, and what a great resource the people of Ireland are. And it's our people here that make the huge difference. So that's a roundabout answer to your story, but it was a roundabout kind of experience for me to grow up as well.
But you're touching on something that's really interesting, which in a sense is the elasticity of Irishness, for want of a term. I mean, Ireland is not perhaps unique insofar as we separate nationhood from statehood. You know, if you want to be Irish, you're welcome to be Irish. And I mean, Ed Sheeran has talked about this. He talks about effectively being Irish-Anglo rather than Anglo-Irish, being born to an Irish Liverpudlian family. And you know, we have many members of the diaspora among us here. You know, that extended Irish family, that fifth province, as it were, the diaspora, how powerful is that when you perform around the world, when you connect, etc., etc.? And how important is it to Ireland?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the diaspora, because it has an enormous effect beyond, you know, our shores here. And we've always felt that doors have opened for us no matter where we are in the world, because there's always an Irishman or Irish woman somewhere in the mix of anything that we're trying to do. And of course it does set an example that we've been so successful abroad that, you know, we welcome people coming in. And it's been a bit of a challenge, I think, in the last 10 years. But I find Irish culture much richer for the diversity that we now have. And I think people are doing well here. And generally, you know, there's been no real problem.
Yeah.
But I would say that wherever you go, if you declare yourself as Irish, the first time you enter anywhere, you find things get a lot easier.
We yesterday in our meetings, we were reflecting upon the fact that the Irish population has grown by 63% since the dark days of the 80s, the pre-Celtic Tiger days, which is one of the biggest demographic changes anywhere, and as you say, has enriched our nation and actually powers our economic growth. I agree entirely with that. But go back to those dark pre-Celtic Tiger days, dear old Dublin, of the commitments and that. You know, you and the guys set out to establish a rock band in the very unpropitious Dublin of the 80s. Risky, it must have been terrifying and thrilling at the same time. Sounds a lot like the life of an entrepreneur.
It's true. I mean, in some ways, a lot of it was predetermined by the fact that even though we had an education and we'd gone through the school system, though in my own case I hadn't entirely completed the process, there was no jobs available in the country. We were just coming out of a fuel crisis. We were, well, certainly in the UK they were working 3-day weeks, so I'm not sure how bad the unemployment was at the time, but we knew it was part of a kind of, there was very little hope out there. And some of our esteemed members in U2 had managed to go to third level education and then looked at it and went, this isn't much fun. Why don't we just add in a few more days of band rehearsal and maybe we can see the world. And so from a position of feeling that we were in a world that was post-Thatcherite, post-Reagan, the opportunities weren't great, that, you know, young people were not really valued for their energy or their resourcefulness. We thought, well, if we just work really, really hard at this thing, and I would say we were smart enough to realize that we had to work really, really hard because it didn't come necessarily naturally to us, and we were somewhat away from the epicenter of the music business, which at the time was London or New York. So rather like an entrepreneur, we set about learning what we did. I mean, it was a lot of fun. There were a lot of failings, but each time we failed, we learned a little bit more about it. And you know, we were probably the last band ever to get signed. I mean, we had so many. We were turned down by so many record companies. We thought very unfairly, but it helped us. It helped us develop our individual sound, our individual attitude, and it taught us that building relationships was important to us. So we got to know a lot of people in the business. We talked to a lot of people. We learned how to ask people for information, to ask people, how do you do this? How do you do that? What's this? What's that? And that stood us in good stead. And to come back to your question, what sort of the entertainment business is about, it's not like you have one product and you year on year strategize and figure out ways to grow that one product bigger. We have to come up with an entirely new set of songs every time we go out and tour. And in the period of our band, which is, you know, approaching 50 years at this stage, that's what we've done every 2 or 3 years, because there's a drop-off of that earlier record. So, and particularly in the way the music business has gone in recent years, where you're not selling a product per se. It's a streaming business, and that doesn't favor everyone equally. It favors the pop acts much better. So the streams of income have changed. The expertise in songwriting is still highly valued, but as probably everyone in the room knows, concert tickets have gone up. So the cost of touring from the band's point of view has become more expensive over the years, but also the ticket price has gone up for the audience. And a big change, I would say, for us, is we came out of that audience, and we came out of an audience that, saw the price of a ticket, the price of going to see a concert. In our early days, it was 50p, 50 old pence. And when I look at tickets for our early concerts, $5, $10. Now, of course, that's entirely different. I'm not complaining, but I do think, younger people who don't have much money are being shut out of the experience of seeing great music.
And what about younger artists? I mean, for the consumer, the platforms provide much cheaper, much more accessible access to music on demand, virtually, not in a live setting. And that's, I think, what you're talking about. But what about emerging artists? How that extraordinary change, that paradox where music has never been more available, but it's harder and harder to monetize music. How is that working? And actually, our first panel this morning was dealt with AI, which is not just coming, by God, it's here. I think that was the message. What is the impact or the implications of AI for emerging artists in particular? I'm asking on behalf of a friend.
Oh, my goodness, that's a whole different topic. And there's 2 or 3 questions in there.
Yeah.
I'll start with what happens for young bands. And really, the model that you two grew up on, all the bands of the 60s and 70s, that doesn't exist anymore. The economics of paying 4 or 5 guys in a band, to do gigs for nothing doesn't work anymore. So what's happened is your very expensive Rolls-Royce model that you're looking at here is actually part of a dying breed of musicians. The younger bands, I have read about bands that go on tour, come back, and get part-time jobs just to be able to survive, because there is no money to support them in the early stages of their career. In the old record company model, you would get advances to get you through a year that you would live on. In the current model, record companies do not really support artists in that way. They look at their social media numbers, they look at what sort of an audience they have, and they don't really listen to the music. They just look at those stats and say, we can work with that. So I think there's going to be less and less rock bands of our stature coming through, and there are less and less studios in existence because they're expensive and uneconomical. So you end up with an environment where people make music on their own, on a computer, on a keyboard somewhere, and it's a different kind of music. It's not based on playing in front of a live audience, which is where we came from. And AI is going to be, or is already going to assist in the creation of that type of music, because as the music is generated in a different way, so the audience consumes it in a different way. And I believe it's much more of a soundtrack. It's a pop soundtrack to whatever else young people are doing. And of course, it's more fragmented, and there are still going to be, there's still an audience for singer-songwriters, but in the high-end commercial end, it's going to be driven more by AI, I would think.
And what's the implications of that, or the effect of that, on creativity, originality, authenticity, innovation? Are we looking at a more homogenized, plastic-packed, Muzak press and play, is it?
I think so. I mean, we talk about the golden era for music as being artist-led, And I think now we're in a period of commercial artists. And whilst there was always that part in the music business, I think the commercial art end has just taken over in the way that, all this kind of commercial art exists and can be done in an AI studio. The print.
Thank you for the subliminal advertising there, by the way.
But the print area, which was essentially mechanized with the printing press, is going to be completely taken over by AI, and music will follow.
One of the core values of impact investing is to back businesses that deliver a social and a human benefit. And it's interesting to think how impact investors would approach the music business. They certainly wouldn't want to crowd out originality. They'd want to support emerging and younger artists. And of course, you and the guy, and there's so many in this room, are investors, believers in the principles of impact investing, which is basically that capitalism can be conscientious. Tell me your sense of how the market can deliver social and sustainable change.
Well, I think, the values within U2 were always, as we became more and more successful, we were the type of people that wanted to look around and see how we could use that success in other ways, and to be curious and ask questions. And that didn't happen in the early days when we were building our career and working really hard. But there was a breathing gap, probably started about 20 years ago, where we started to look at these other models. And from being part of the Live Aid generation, and the Live Aid generation was probably the first generation. Well, there were many, over the years, there were many artists that saw that they could affect social change. But Live Aid was a real kind of tipping point where artists could get on mass media en masse, and it was way before the technology that exists now. And we could embarrass governments or politicians into seeing things our way and changing things. That was a thought that was of its time. As time moved on, politicians and governments have been less willing to listen to artists, and artists' power has not been what it was at the time. So we, started to grapple with our particular financial success and figure out how to use it and how to structure it. And so impact investing looked like a very good thing to engage in, as in straightforward philanthropy and giving to charities or whatever only had so much effect. It only went so far. And so we were curious and excited about being able to find a way of investing in things that not only benefited the investor, but benefited the community overall. And we in Ireland have benefited extremely well from that.
Yeah. And to close, if I may, Ireland. We talked about the Ireland when you first arrived here, and your family engaged with that airline that nobody could pronounce, to the Ireland of today, the second richest nation on the planet on a per capita basis, people flooding in, finding opportunity here. I'm kind of answering your question for you, my friend, but how about we find out? How optimistic are you for, as Enda would say, the best little island in the world, best small country in the world?
I'm very optimistic for this country, because I think, because of the scale, because it's small, you can try out ideas here and evaluate them quite quickly if they make a difference. And it doesn't cost an awful lot of money to roll out something here. I'm kind of continually amazed at the quality of our politicians. I think they're very forward-thinking. they're much younger than other Western leaders, or indeed US leaders. So I feel this energy and I feel this engagement, and they're close to the people. So the changes that happened in Ireland when we were 16, 17, 18, we were doing benefit concerts to encourage the legalization of contraception. That was where we started. There was no divorce. And in that time, 50 years, and most of it, I think, happened in the last 20 years, we've completely reversed that. We have abundant ability to get contraception now, along with everyone else in the world. We were the first people to have same-sex marriage. We are a much more liberal country than I would ever have thought we were going back 20 years even.
Yeah, 3 cheers to that. And to close, a very serious question. It comes from the floor from a Mr. A. Foy, who earnestly wants to know, with my hydrangeas, should I go for a good hard prune now or a lighter touch sped over the season? You are on.
I think he should be talking to Edge later.
Okay, yes, that's right. Ah, what a segue. It's all about the soil. So listen, with that, my friends, please, will you show your appreciation for Adam?
Thanks, Stuart. That's it.
Thank you.
That's it.
Good.